And we've been pretty transparent about how we're raising my son. I would say me in particular have been not for social media or for likes, but just because it is without question where I am in this moment. That is my focus. That's what I am practically obsessed with, like raising our son to be a good human being. But I just want to be clear. I was not always like this. Welcome to the Rich and Regular podcast, where we explore life at the intersection of money. I'm Julien, and if you've been listening to our podcast for a while, then you know my co-host, my wife, Kirsten, is normally here. I've been doing this long enough to know that let me just go ahead and get this out of the way now. There's nothing wrong. She's fine. We're fine. Everything's fine. This is just a special episode. It is a topic, fatherhood, that is important to me. If you've been following us for a long time, then you know this is also a topic that I have addressed in a number of different ways, and we've woven this topic into several of the things that we've done from previous episodes of Money on the Table. I'm sure I've mentioned it several times, both actively or passively on the podcast and so on. And if you've been listening to us for a while, you know that a few months back, I believe, Kirsten had a chance to do an episode where it was just her. It was a topic that she was really interested in. She had a chance to speak with her favorite psychotherapist. And so we agreed that whenever there was an opportunity for one of us to talk about something that we thought was really, really important, whether or not it had a direct tie to money or not, that we would use this platform as an opportunity to do that. So you can think of this as your 2024 fatherhood message. Okay, so let's just start with who this message is even for. Obviously, if you are a father and you might be interested in listening to another dad sort of share his perspective, then this may be important to you. If you are an aspiring father or soon to be father, I think this is something that you might find really, really useful. I know before I became a dad, I was really out there seeking information, and I had a hard time finding other fathers that I can relate to. And over the years, I've come to learn that I am that guy to a lot of guys in my life, whether they're my same age, and in some cases, it's men that are even older than me that are looking at some of the things that I'm doing with my son, the way that I am approaching parenting, and I am in many ways acting as a bit of a role model for them. And so if you're an aspiring father or you are expecting, then maybe you'll be able to find some insight in this as well. But I think that it's also important for moms out there to hear from a father in a way that hopefully does not come across as judgmental or, eye roll inducing or any of those things. I mean, we have spoken about this stuff, like I said, in the past. And if I'm just being honest, it's not been the best performing content, but we continue to beat that drum because we also know a lot about who we're speaking to, like whether we've met or not. For those that we have met, there's a big difference between what shows up on, let's say, YouTube or podcast metrics and what people really want to talk about when we meet them in person. And so that's why we're having this conversation, in addition to several of the other non-traditional personal finance conversations that we've had in the past. So I've been thinking about what I wanted to say in this podcast episode probably for about 3 or 4 months now. And I've started multiple notes in my phone and on Google Drive, just trying to structure it all. And what I've learned about myself is that whenever I find myself just kind of circling the wagon a little bit and I can't quite land the plane, there's probably not a perfect singular idea that ties everything together in this perfect and creative and inspiring way. And so what I tend to do there is just kind of think of it in terms of building blocks. I take all of the most important parts and I just break them up into little pieces, and then I tie it together at the end, as opposed to trying to find this creative through line that magically makes all of these different things make sense. And so what I want to do is just share a couple of different stories and anecdotes, things that I have experienced and learned about my son, also about myself over the last couple of years. So the first thing I would say that I have noticed about my journey to fatherhood is that I could kind of break it up in phases. And so the very first phase, I would say, I would just call it the oblivious phase, because I did not think about fatherhood at all. And I bring that up because I think of the way that people view me and the way that I'm living my life now. I can understand why people would assume that I always wanted to be a dad. Like this is something that I had been waiting for. Like that's not true at all. Like throughout my 20s, and I would say even through the first half of my 30s, my son was born in 2017. I was 37 years old. So I was like the last dude in like my whole crew that had a kid. And prior to that, I would say, and I would say through my 20s and through my 30s, I really just did not think about being a dad at all. Like it was the furthest thing from my memory. And in fact, I can remember I must have been maybe 30 something years old before I even held a kid in my arms. A friend of mine who had just had a son invited us over shortly after the son was born and everything was cool. And even then, I was nervous. Like I just did not know. I was scared to hold the baby because I just had heard all these things about their neck and I was just freaking out. But I just wanted to be clear about that. So I went through a really, really strong oblivious phase. And then obviously after I met Kirsten, we decided that we wanted to try to have a child. There was a time period where all I did was try to plan and prepare for it. Like very similar to how I plan and prepare for a business or a real estate venture or whatever it is. Like I was very methodical about diving in, reading books and watching documentaries and doing all of these things. But even then, I think it's safe to say that the idea was that I was thinking that I could think my way through this entire experience and plan for it. But I think any seasoned father will tell you, like, you can do all you want to prepare for it, but there's nothing like actually having a human being that you are responsible for. And so for me, I would say that would really be that third phase after our son was born. And when people talk about that first day where you bring them home, that was a very real moment for me. Even prior to that, like there being a child in the car that you're driving from the hospital to your home with. Like it's absolutely one of the most surreal experiences ever. You don't notice how wild and noisy traffic is until you have a child who was just born into this world in your car, in your care. And similarly, when you walk them through that front door and realize that, okay, the room that we prepared, now you have to live there and sleep there and do all of the things. And that's when you realize all the things that you just flat out had forgotten, despite all the research and all the advice from all of the well-meaning friends. And I went through that period and, I learned on the go, like I would say most fathers do. But I think the phase that I'm in now is one that I think is the most interesting, which is that he is a full-fledged human being with a point of view and an opinion. And I am not just his father, I'm his role model. I am or was his baseball coach. I'm soon to be a pretty active part of the PTA. And so I'll be at his school more often and seeing him, in his element while he's at school. I am his punching bag. I'm his vessel that he uses to see just how strong he is every single night. And so it is a very interesting thing when you really reach this point where you understand that everything you do, from your speech patterns to your habits to what you eat to the music that you listen to, this child is absorbing that information, trying to replicate it, and in some cases remixing it and kind of making it their own. It just really helps to bring this entire journey to life. Now, I don't know what phases come after this. I'm just being honest. My son is 7, and I've been pretty active since the moment that he was born. But the reason why I bring all of this up is because, as I said earlier, I understand the role that I play in a lot of people's lives in terms of what I represent and fatherhood and those kinds of things. And we've been pretty transparent about how we're raising my son. I would say me in particular have been not for social media or for likes, but just because it is without question where I am in this moment. That is my focus. That's what I am practically obsessed with, like raising our son to be a good human being. But I just want to be clear. I was not always like this. And so my message to you is that if you feel like you are a bit removed from that, or if that's something that you want to be, but you don't know how you'll get there, I just want to give you a little bit of comfort to know that, hey, I was not always like this. And it's no different than if we were talking about sports or being savvy with money, right? Like I was not always like this. Kirsten's pretty transparent about her journey. She was not always financially responsible. She has gone through a journey to go from where she was to where she is now. And I think the same is true for parenting. So the big message here is to give yourself some grace. If you're looking at another father or an uncle or somebody else that has a child and they're not quite where you want them to be, give them some grace. give them some time. Maybe you pass on this podcast episode or any valuable resource that you think that they could find useful, and just give them a little bit of time to bake, because I did not come out of the oven like this. It was a journey to get here. The second story or anecdote that I want to share is really this journey that we've been on over the last year or so. So if you've been following us on social media, especially Instagram, then you know we've been pretty transparent about our son's baseball journey. I mean, he probably picked up a baseball bat, I would say maybe over a year ago for the very first time. And prior to that, he showed no sign of athletic ability whatsoever. But after that day, it just kind of clicked and he found interest in it. And we've just been building and building and building ever since then. And one of the days, there have been several that I think really stand out in my mind, but I would say the last game of the last season is one that really stood out to me. And the reason is because my son won a bet. And so earlier in that season, the bet that I made for him was that if he hit basically the equivalent of a little league home run, which is, I would say maybe around 150 feet or so, I would get him a gold chain. His favorite player is Ronald Acuna Jr., who plays for the Atlanta Braves, and he wears a gold chain. And so our son saw that, wanted to be just like him. And so I raised the stakes and said, hey, if you hit a home run, I will run out and get you a gold chain. Nothing's crazy, but I would get him a nice gold chain, something that would make him feel cool and feel like he looked like Ronald Acuna Jr. Well, around halfway through the season, we started to realize that he had kind of hit a little bit of a slump. Like he would go up and hit really, really well, and then he'd have some bad games. And so then we said, you know what, let's widen the bet a little bit. Let's make it a little, not necessarily easier, but like let's also look at some of the other parts of baseball that are important, like your fielding and your catching. And so it went from just hitting one big hit, 150 feet to, well, if you hit three grounders or smaller hits, but they all roll and hit the fence, we'll get you the chain. Or if you can catch a pop-up, which, literally like catching a pop-up is frightening. You see this big ball goes up maybe 200 feet in the air, maybe 100 feet, doesn't matter. But when it's coming down, like if you miss it, it's going to hit you in the face or it's going to hit you in the chest or something like that. So for most kids, it's absolutely frightening. And at the time, that was like a stretch goal because he was not showing very many signs of that. Also, because it's literally, there aren't that many kids who are going up to bat and are strong enough to hit a ball to catch a pop-up at all, right? Like there just aren't that many pop-ups. So we were fine with saying, you know what, let that be a stretch goal because it is a really, really good part of his development as a baseball player. Fast forward to the last game. Our son at this point is going through maybe the second of his little slumps throughout the season, but we're okay with it because we realized that he was learning and developing. And not only did he catch a pop-up, he caught two pop-ups in that game and made a double play, which for me as his father and his coach was really weird because all he cared about, and he looked back, he was like, I want that chain. And I couldn't even argue with him because like he won the bet fair and square. And I share that because one, it was a problem for him. It was a problem for us. There were other fathers on the team who, again, you just don't see pop-ups, let alone two. And our son caught two in a game and then made a double play. You definitely never see double plays at that particular level. He did all of that in one game. And I was happy for him, but I wasn't as surprised as some of the other parents were because I realized in that moment that, oh, wow, like this is not something that is common for a lot of these kids. But for me, because we've been practicing so much and we step outside and we play catch and we go to the park and we stay after and we spend so much time together, not just because I'm trying to drill him and make him some big baller, but just because it's just what we do. I have the time and flexibility. And to us, it's really cool to be able to mix these things up, whether it's video games, Legos, travel, baseball, all that stuff. But I wasn't surprised because I'd seen him do it 100 times before in practice. And so all of that to say, I share this story because it was a big day. And not only was I there, but I was there as his coach. I was literally there behind him as he caught it. I was there as we were practicing and leading up to it. And so it felt, as much as I thought about it, as much of a win for me to watch him grow and develop and to feel confident achieving this milestone as it was for him. And even when I reflect back on my own journey as a child athlete who played baseball and played basketball, I don't have those kind of memories with my parents. And I'm not sharing this as some type of indictment on them or any of the parents who are out there who don't have the opportunity to be actively involved in their child's lives. But I'm just saying, as a father who is, you have a completely different appreciation for these moments. You have a very, very deep understanding of them and what it means, not just for you, but also what it means for that child. And when you think about how many of us are really accustomed to our parents not being there, our parents not having the flexibility because they have to work or because they just aren't interested, you really start to understand that, wow, there's a spectrum here. And if you can appreciate how devastating it feels to not have your parent there in the crowd rooting for you, then you have to understand that on the other side of that is like a feeling of just complete and absolute joy and happiness, because that's exactly like it is all encompassing, right? Like your mom was there, your dad was there, your family was there. They were there in that moment. And so all of that to say, I share this other little anecdote to say that we're all making a choice, right? And kids do remember, just like you as an adult remember some of these things. You know if your mom and your dad wasn't there. So I share that to say we can all probably make a better point to be a bit more present, whether it's just being at home and relaxing and watching TV and agreeing to put our phones down, or it's deciding to, like me and my son do, go spend a couple hours riding our bikes together on the trail, or it's spending an hour on the baseball field, or whatever it is. Like spending that time and prioritizing that time over time is one of the absolute best things that you can do, and it does not have to cost you. And I'll also add this little point. This is probably a little personal, but I think at this point you guys know enough about us to say that we're rarely afraid to go there. I have spent more time with my son at the age of 7 than I've probably spent with my father for my entire life. And in fact, if I'm being fair, I would say by the time I was maybe 2 or 3 years old, I probably spent more time with my son than I have with my father my entire life. And that's not to critique him or to say he was a bad father. I have a good relationship with my dad, but the expectations for being a father were very, very different back then. And there's a lot of data that's been shared around that difference, but this is just my version of it. And it's not just my father. I spent most of my life with my mom, but even now, I know for a fact that because of the way that we're raising our son, and because of the things that I've been able to do with my son, that I will likely eclipse my mom in terms of the time spent and the memories created probably by the time he's 10 than I have with my mother my entire life. And so when you think about the richness of the relationship that you have an opportunity to build with your child, I just want to encourage you guys to not think about what your parents did for you and automatically think that you want to 5 or 10x that. Just think about what works best for you, but it should be more. It should be better. Okay, so I think I'm going to wrap it up with just those two little anecdotes, and I'm going to try to wrap it up in maybe a handful of final thoughts. And when I think about the business mission that we have here at Rich and Regular, which is to inspire better conversations about money, or even with this podcast, which is life at the intersection of money, like we're less interested in talking about the nitty gritty details and the tactics every single day. And we're far more interested in terms of looking at the way that money impacts everyday lives, because those are the things that we found really motivate people to actually change. And in this case, I just want to focus on the idea of having conversations about money. We've spoken about this in previous episodes in the past, but I want to make one particular thing clear because I don't think we've actually framed it up this way before, which is to say, whether or not you have a direct conversation with your child or not about money, you're teaching them about money. Whether you're going to sit them down and do the math and do the long division and the multiplication and show them the details and open up the statements, whether you do that or you decide to continue to wait or to punt because they seem maybe immature and they're not mentally or emotionally capable of understanding those things, it doesn't really matter. Whether you're having active, detailed, nitty-gritty conversations or you are completely avoiding these conversations because you don't think your child is ready for it. Either way, your child is learning about money. And so I think it's a better option to at least start to shape their point of view through active conversations where you control the pace, you control the curriculum, you control the mood and the tone in which this child is making everyday understandings as it relates to how money impacts their own life, because over time, they're going to develop these understandings anyway. Last thing that I'll say is really a reference to a quote that I read not too long ago, and I want to share it with you guys because it really helped me rethink the way that I think about the way that I raise my son. And it says something to the effect of parents who believe that their only job is to provide for their children will be in for a rude awakening when their children no longer need them for survival. And I think that is a really, really important point. It's certainly something that I can relate to because I've heard time and time again that the objective was to put clothes on your back and put a roof over your head, right? Back in the day, that was the bar. That was the requirement. That was what defined good parenting. I think today it's pretty clear that more is needed. And so as a mother, as a father, your job is not just to bring home the bacon, not just to provide for that child. It's to be a role model. It's to be a confidant. It's to be a coach, to be a sounding board, to be a punching bag, to be all of these things, that person's chef, that the vehicle that they use or the lens that they see the world through. All of those things are what's required to you, not just bringing home the baking and allowing the parent who is actually doing the parenting to set the tone. When you have an active relationship with your child, I think it's one of the most beautiful things in the world. I mean, my son says things to me now that I think are so wildly mature. And as much as I start to think that, wow, he's just like this gifted kid, the reality is he is a reflection of us. He's a reflection of the time that we spent together and the memories that we've created together. And these things only happen because we've made ourselves available as parents, because we've deprioritized some of the other things that used to occupy so much of our times, which is primarily our jobs, by prioritizing saving and investing and figuring out other flexible ways that we can earn income. We've now given ourselves an opportunity to build such deep and rich relationships with our child. We know for a fact that while we can't predict the future, you can't undo so much of the nurturing that we've been able to do just over the last 7 years. I'm probably going to butcher this stat, but I'm pretty sure there's something to the effect of like 90% of a human's brain is formed before they're 3 years old. This is part of the reason why kids have such big old Tweety Bird heads. And what grows after that is really just bone. But the brain and everything that's in it, the pathways, the habits, the understanding of tone and mood, all of those things are really kind of formed. That lens that they are using to help understand the world around them is formed by the time they're 3. And something to the effect of like 75% of parent-child bonding is done before they're like their mid-teens. And so this time that we have had to raise our son, we know, much like everything else, is going to compound. Just really look forward to seeing how he grows. And we're glad that we have had an opportunity to spend as much time with him as we have over the last 7 years. So that's really what I wanted to share with you guys today, right? I mean, maybe there's a financial message in there, maybe there isn't. But I mean, I think at the highest level, there's definitely a connection between prioritizing, saving, and investing, and in terms of all of the things that it unlocks later on in life. So it's not just a matter of how much you have in your portfolio or how much you have saved or how many assets you've been able to acquire. It's also how much time that the acquisition of all of these assets affords you, right? How many options do you have now that are available to you now that you aren't forced to spend Monday through Friday, or some cases more than that, depending on your line of work and depending on the hours that you work, whether it's 9 to 5 or the graveyard shift or both, right? The goal of financial freedom and financial independence is to give yourself the flexibility to focus on the things that are really, really important. And I really can't think of more things that are more important than the role that we all play as parents, assuming you have children or want to have children. And so I hope if you are a father, a soon-to-be father, you got something out of this. I hope if you're a mother or soon-to-be mother, you got something out of this, just in terms of the importance of parenting. And so to all the dads out there, I want to wish you guys a happy Father's Day. For all the soon-to-be dads out there, buckle up, and happy first Father's Day coming soon. And we will see you guys next week.
If you like videos like this and want to see more, make sure you click subscribe and turn on notifications.